What's going on, guys? It's Michael here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today is a very special day because we have a brand new Skyrim build just for you. This is an all new build and it just might be the most messed up, disgusting, despicable character we've ever made. This build isn't for the faint of heart. It's Namira's champion, the Abomination. The Abomination is the embodiment of everything foul, vile, and reprehensibly evil. He is a modern day legend, carving his way into folklore with a blood-soaked knife and becoming a walking horror story. The people of Cyrodiil and Skyrim wouldn't dare speak his name around a campfire in the Drow Mountains, for they fear that the mere mention of the Abomination might lead to a gruesome slaughter. Armed with the slimy, wretched sword of the dragon priest Mirak, there are no redeeming qualities about the Abomination. He is guilty of the greatest crimes imaginable, and both physically and mentally he is truly disgusting. Sound like the kind of character you want to roleplay? I thought so. The Abomination's morality-free, corrupt mind allows you to make all kinds of unique, unconventional decisions when role-playing in Skyrim. This has to be one of our most messed up but fun builds to date. Before we get into the build, don't forget that timestamps can be found in the description to help you find your way to each part of the video, as well as the link to our newly made Patreon and our social media accounts. But with that said, let's start things off with the Abomination's race, standing stone, and stats. The Abomination is an orc, meaning he can use his Berserker Rage to go into a rampage, taking half damage and dealing double damage for 60 seconds. This is incredibly powerful for the entire game. Thanks to his awesome blood, he also has a built-in +10 bonus to heavy armor and a +5 bonus to one-handed smithing and enchanting, which will all help out at the start. Early in the game, the Lover Stone is the right pick for leveling your various skills, but after that, the Atronach Stone, as you probably know well enough by now, is hands down the best stone in the game for most builds, and the 50 extra points of magicka plus 50% spell absorption is well worth the -50% magicka regen. As for the stat spread, the Abomination will have 70% health, so he can go full on tank mode in combat, releasing his rage, and then 30% magicka for reanimation, keeping in mind that we have some conjuration cost reduction to help us. Now, stamina investment isn't really necessary thanks to his sword and ring, and it isn't essential for the Abomination to be power attacking constantly anyway. It would be nice if we could start off this backstory by saying the Abomination had a standard upbringing, but that couldn't be any further from the truth. The reality is that this story will live in infamy for generations, serving as the perfect way for parents to scare their children into getting into bed on time. The Abomination's story begins in Bruma, in northern Cyrodiil. He was the son of a blacksmith who had worked tirelessly for much of his life to develop a positive reputation with the locals. As orcs, their family was at disadvantage to begin with. Their outsider status was fortunately countered by his father's undeniable skill at the forge. He created some of the best arms and armor the Imperial province had ever seen, and that had bought their family a comfortable life. Unfortunately, life wasn't fair to their family. If being orcs wasn't hard enough, the Abomination contracted an unknown disease in infancy. The cause was unheard of and beyond the skills of Bruma's healers. So for many months, the young orc was covered from head to toe in bulbous boils, which wept bloody pus, staining his bed sheets and all of his clothes. Desperate, his parents took him to a priest outside the city walls. He claimed to be a priest, though his hut was garnished with various plants and fluid-filled jars, making him look more like a druid or a soothsayer. The priest applied a foul-smelling salve to each of the young orc's blemishes, and the Abomination felt his skin burn as if he'd just been thrown into a pit of fire. He released an infernal scream and soiled himself from the sheer pain, but when the process was finished and his parents were called back to the hut, the young orc was asleep from exhaustion. He looked almost peaceful, and his sores were gone. Despite much pleading, the priest took no payment and sent them on their way. The following few days seemed to pass by trouble-free, but exactly 1 week after supposedly having been cured, the Abomination's father, while working out at the forge, saw his boy sitting cross-legged in the grass, biting at the broken neck of a rabbit. There was a wild look in the boy's eyes that filled his father with angst. He took the rabbit from the Abomination and gave him a stern talking to, and that was that. For a while. But it seemed that the Abomination's disease wasn't just on his skin, it was deep inside him, regardless of the fact that his exterior had been healed. Mentally, he was warped. A week went by and nothing else strange had been noticed, until one morning when his parents came to wake him. The Abomination was covered in his own filth, and the walls were painted with excrement. He had drawn crude 8-legged creatures, most likely spiders, and then there were winding streaks that looked like slugs crawling across the walls. His mother broke down into tears and fell to her knees, unable to stand upright. upright. Holding his breath and holding back tears of his own, his father carried him outside to wash him. His father made his mother promise to keep this from reaching the grapevine. No one else could know about what was happening, as they'd be shunned. Occurrences like this continued into his teenage years, and resiliently his parents cared for him, cleaned up after him, and tried in vain to discipline him. One day, the Abomination snuck out of his room to play in the grass as he loved to do. He found a sharp stick and began stabbing all the insects he could see before feasting on his newly created vile kebab. He heard footsteps behind him but made no effort to stop what he was doing. The figure walked around him and knelt in front of him. It wasn't his father. It was an elderly woman in dark robes. She beckoned him to follow her, promising him a gift, and so he did. There was something welcoming about her. They left the city and ventured out into the surrounding forests. Eventually, they stopped at a statue of an old, ugly lady. The Abomination approached. As he neared the shrine, he heard a voice in his head. He'd never heard it before, yet somehow it seemed familiar. When the spirit finished speaking, the priestess he had been traveling with presented a corpse to him. It was a young woman, and she hadn't been dead for long. Her skin still had some color to it. The voice in his head urged him to taste the still warm flesh. The scent of blood whirled its way to his nose, tempting him, making his mouth water. He brought his tusk-filled jaw to the smooth skin of the dead woman's arm, his lips detecting the invisible hairs, and then he suddenly clamped his jaw onto the arm, pulling and chewing, desperately trying to rip flesh from bone. As for the rest of the ordeal, it is best I not describe it, as otherwise you might give up the contents of your stomach. When he was finished, the priestess escorted him back to within sight of the city walls. He walked the rest of the distance home by himself. What exactly was going through his mind at this time was a mystery even to himself. Late that night, when the world was silent, the Abomination stirred. He got out of bed, spittle dripping from his mouth, and he salivated uncontrollably. He made his way into the hallway, stepping carefully so as not to wake anyone. He descended the stairs into the kitchen and reached for the sharpest carving knife on the wall before returning to the upstairs hallways. He stopped outside the door to his parents' room and opened the door slowly. He made his way around the bedside, raised the knife, and brought it down with the ferocity of a rabid animal, starved and stupefied. His father died instantly, and then his mother woke. She screamed as the Abomination frantically tried to silence her, stabbing her repeatedly until the life left her. They lay dead and he began feasting, but before he could finish, he heard a bashing on the door. Someone must have heard her screams and alarmed the guards. He pocketed the carving knife and made for the window, climbing to freedom as the guards burst into the front door. From here, the Abomination retreated from the city, fleeing to the Jural Mountains. The guards, after witnessing the horror that had taken place, followed the tracks until they were covered by the heavy snows of the mountains. Sketches of his gruesome face were placed all over the city, with a hefty reward for anyone who had butchered the brutal beast, for he had committed one of the greatest sins known to Tamriel. For the coming years, the Abomination resided in the mountains, preying on travelers and etching himself into Tamrielic folklore. While venturing the snowy peaks, he was caught by an Imperial patrol alongside Ulfric's fighters, and then he was taken to Helgen to pay for his sins. It probably would have been a great favor to the world if the executioner had lopped off the Abomination's head, ending his horrific tale then and there, but that wasn't to be the case, and the World Eater, Alduin himself, came to his rescue, unleashing a much more malevolent force on Skyrim, and that's exactly how the Abomination will play. He understands social norms enough that he can appear to the average person as a normal orc, but he will always be one step away from devolving into madness. He'll always have a voice in the back of his mind telling him to do something disgusting or cruel, and for that reason he'll fit right in with Namira's cult and especially enjoys Iola. He will do any kind of awful act to sate his base desires, and he has no moral code whatsoever. As long as he does good by Namira, he's free to do as he pleases. With this in mind, you can do many quests in unique ways, making choices the most rational characters would never even consider. When doing Namira's quest, some of the speech options line up perfectly with the Abomination's backstory, so be sure to choose the appropriate ones. You'll know what to say when the time comes. As for factions, because the Abomination can blend in somewhat with the common folk, you're not limited by much just because he's disgusting. The main story and the Dragonborn DLC are totally viable. You can also do the Dawn Guard, siding with the vampires, as just like you, they're a plague to the land and its inhabitants. The Vampire Lord form is a great way to show off just how hideous the Abomination is. The Dark Brotherhood is definitely an option, as morals won't be hindering you in the slightest. The College of Winterhold would be beneficial for your skills, but if you decide to join, which you probably should, keep in mind that pretending to be normal is incredibly difficult and exhausting for this despicable creature. Now that we have the Abomination's backstory, which we apologize for having to share with you in such detail, as well as his role-playing and faction choices, let's see how we can translate those into his skills, spells, perks, and overall playstyle. The main skills for this build will be one-handed conjuration, heavy armor smith, smithing and enchanting. But before we look closer and figure out exactly which perks to take from each tree, let's quickly run over the spells and shouts you'll need. Conjuration spells to look out for include all of the reanimation ones. Dead Thrall and Dread Zombie should be your final build picks, and for shouts, using Soul Tear specifically to rip the soul from your enemy is a great pick for this build. But with these cleared up, let's now get into the Abomination's essential perks. Over the years, the Abomination learned to wield a blade in the most horrific of ways. What started out as a concerning hobby, skewering small critters and insects, soon ended with the cold-blooded murder of the two people who toiled endlessly to try to make a life for their son. This progressed to him hiding in the mountains and killing travelers with ease. Say what you will about the Abomination, but he has definitely learned how to sufficiently handle a bladed weapon. From the one-handed skill tree, take the middle branch up to Savage Strike. Savage Strike will be a great perk to show off the Abomination's cruelty, severing heads from shoulders and gaining a 25% damage boost to standing power attacks. As a servant of Namira, the prince associated with cannibalism and the manipulation of the dead and decaying, the Abomination will love the idea of training in the arts of necromancy. From the conjuration skill tree, we suggest taking the third branch up to Twin Souls, and then the right branch all the way up to Master Conjuration. Twin Souls will allow you to have two undead servants at once, and Master Conjuration will guarantee that you can cast all of the best reanimating spells, including Dead Thrall. This once gravely troubled child is now a warped beast, feasting on younglings and slaying even the most competent of travelers, and he doesn't do this dressed in fine robes. No, this imposing beast wears heavy-plated armor, terrifying his victims with his monstrously large frame. From the heavy armor skill tree, go for everything except for matching set and reflect blows. Tower of Strength is a perfect match for the Abomination, as no lowly bandit should be able to unbalance him. This perk will give you 50% less stagger when wearing all heavy armor. The Abomination's father was a modest, hardworking, and truly masterful blacksmith. Maybe if he weren't an orc and wasn't the father to a cursed child, he would have been living in a palace, making arms and armor worthy of an emperor, but that wasn't meant to be. The Abomination didn't pay much attention to his father's profession, but he has some of the hereditary strength and coordination to make a decent smith. From the smithing skill tree, take Arcane Blacksmith and then everything on the right up to Dragon Smithing. Lastly, we have Enchanting. The Abomination has been exposed to all kinds of dark and twisted magic in his life, and with this skill, he will learn to use some of it to enhance his powers. From the Enchanting skill tree, take the middle branch up to Extra Effect. And so with the skills, spells, and perks outlined, here's how the Abomination will play in-game. Unsurprisingly, he won't waste too much time or mental energy making elaborate schemes. Instead, he'll rely on his sheer power and terrifying presence to crush his opponents, slashing them to pieces and then feeding on the convenient cut slices of flesh in the aftermath of it all. When he isn't fighting alone, he's reanimating the corpses of foes he's just killed to serve alongside him. You won't need to feed on every corpse you create, just enough to sate your hunger, but ultimately it's up to you. Maybe you do want to feed on every person you kill. You can change up the gameplay by implementing the Soul Tear Shout or the Berserker's Rage ability wherever you see fit. Both of these are insanely powerful and helpful in combat. The Abomination will wear the heavy Falmer armor topped with a dragon plate helmet for a very creepy, imposing aesthetic. Enchant the chest piece with Fortify Conjuration and Fortify Health, and then the gauntlets and the boots with Fortify One-Handed and an enchantment of your choice. On the dragon plate helmet, put Fortify Conjuration and an enchantment of your choice. Adding a necklace with Fortify Conjuration and One-Handed helps massively, and then wear the Ring of Namira for the role-playing, the 50 extra points of stamina, and the ability to feed on corpses for extra health points and added health regeneration. As for your weapon, go for Mirax Sword Smith up for more damage. This slimy sword perfectly fits the Abomination's disgusting personality and appearance. Aside from its slithering animation, it has the handy effect of absorbing 15 points of stamina with each hit. One additional thing to mention is something we've purposely made not essential to the build due to the difficulty of finding them, but in the Dragonborn DLC, you can use spider scrolls to make spiders fight for you. These are hard to come by, but fit the Namira role-playing really well. And there you have it, guys. Subscribe to FudgeMuppet if you're new to the channel, and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. This was our latest brand new Skyrim build, the Abomination. Don't forget to check out links to our social media accounts and our Patreon in the description, as well as timestamps to help you navigate throughout the video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'm Michael, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.